It looks like we're having a little bit of trouble getting our Facebook Live to upload. So we are going to go ahead and begin, and hopefully that will come live here within a few minutes. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center's Social Justice Community Forum Series. I'm Ashley Center, the museum's Outreach and Public Relations Coordinator. It is the mission of the museum to gather, engage, and educate the community on the history, culture, and diversity of our region. The museum is a place where we can meet with our neighbors, learn about issues important to our community and our world, and discuss our thoughts and opinions. While we're not able to gather physically, we're eager to serve in this role virtually by gathering in forums like this. Sorry, I just realized I'm screen sharing. I am so sorry. Normally, I am not the one who screen shares. So we're happy to host this forum on social justice. Our goal today is to engage in a thoughtful, inclusive, and open-minded discussion about systemic racism in education, about the inequities this creates, and about the steps we can take to begin to break down these barriers. It's my privilege to introduce the panel joining me today. We have Wenatchee Superintendent Paul Gordon, Wenatchee School Board Director Maria Iñiguez, Eastmont Superintendent Garn Christensen, Wenatchee Valley College MESA Program Director Dr. Karina Vega-Villa, Wenatchee Valley College instructors Dr. Bobby Johnson, and Dr. Awanti Iñiguez. We also have Spanish translation provided by Anna Reagan with Claris Languages. I'm going to, oh good, Kristen's on the screen sharing now, thank you. If you are logged into Zoom, you have the option of listening to the translated audio channel. You can do this by clicking on the icon of the world and selecting the Spanish option. Before we begin, I want to remind the panelists to speak a little bit slower than your normal rate to help out our translator. If you're joining us live and have questions for the panel, please submit them through the Zoom Q&As or chat located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, these are available at the top of your screen. If you're on Facebook Live, please submit your questions in the comments. Our staff will do our best to address as many questions as we're able to. 66 years ago, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that separate but equal education was unconstitutional. However, race and economic disparities continue to be barriers in education today. So my first question to all of you is that we hear the words systemic and institutional racism, and I wanted to ask, are these the same thing? What are they, and are they the same or are they different?
I can go ahead and share my first. So they are related, but they are not the same. So we live in a racialized society where, depending on your race, you may reach at different levels. And so you have the effect of racism in the individual, and you also have the effect of discrimination based on race that you see at the institutional level. So each institution will have its own protocols, procedures, and policies that puts limits in the individual based on race. And then you have systemic racism, which is at a larger scale, how that combination of different institutions that have policies and procedures that discriminate based on race, the effect that it has on the overall individual as a whole. So probably the best example of systemic racism is what we have seen with COVID, right? Because we see how access to services has been limited and has been different for different populations. And it has been in different areas that affects their lives.
Just to add to that, the like individualized racism can sometimes be intentional, right? It can be unintentional too. There's ways. Systemic racism is often unintentional, at least in the current, right? It might have been set up more intentionally, but it's persisted perhaps unintentionally. And an important component, in addition to what Karina says, is that it's sort of white as the default in America, right? Like whiteness as the default, which if you're white, you often don't notice. I can speak to that, right? And so the system itself is doing these things and oppressing and being supremacist to groups of people.
I'll just jump in. I think a really good example of what this looks like in the day-to-day operation is how we teach reading to our students when we recognize for generations that Black, Brown, Indigenous students of poverty have been reading significantly below students of Caucasian descent. So when you think about NAEP, which is the only nationwide way of assessing students that's reliable, valid, and we lean into, when you think about fourth grade reading data, for example, 22% of Latino students are reading at grade level. 18% of Black students are reading at grade level. Think for a moment, if that were true for affluent white children, if we would not have turned schools upside down to transform that. That it speaks to both the comments that were made earlier around it's working for most white people and working for people with some affluence, because even if the system itself is not working for you, I can go out and get tutoring, I can get other supports, or I have such a great network for my kids that it may not matter because I can still access 2- and 4-year colleges at an easier rate, even if I'm still reading below grade level or doing mathematics below grade level. So it's a piece that I think, because sometimes when we talk about racism, it feels too big, and I like to bring it right back down to the school level of students being able to read and write. And I believe reading has been used for 400 years to oppress humans. Because if you cannot read and write, you have no way to actually advocate for yourself, to be that person who can build knowledge and experiences. So it is why 400 years ago and to recent days that people have taken away the privilege of being able to have the opportunity to learn how to read, because it is that oppressive.
Thank you. I think that you just brought it around to how systemic racism applies in education. Is there anything anyone wants to add about in education specifically, like how we see the effects of systemic racism?
And I would like to add to what that Paul was telling about the reading. And I teach chemistry, so I see a huge difference in students' math knowledge. That's another thing. Like they are not like based on your race. Like I see some of them they are coming from the same school. They're coming from the same school system, but like the way they handle, the way they think, the way they approach a problem is a little different based on the race. And I see that in my classroom too. But with a little bit of like as Paul says, like it might be like, because some people have access to tutoring and some people has not access to that. Like when with the resources that we provide at the college with MESA and all, and I see a huge development in these areas. So it's always about them not getting the correct resources for them to thrive in their education.
Exactly. Well, to follow up on what Awanti just said, the fact that MESA exists is a response to what has happened in higher ed, right? We need a special program to support underrepresented minoritized groups who want to go into science and engineering careers. So these are the careers that have higher paying jobs, and we need this support to help them navigate school. A lot of the students that we work with are first generation low-income students. So we act as a bridge for them to continue to further their education so that they can access careers that will help them have a better life than their parents. A lot of their parents, a lot of the students that we work with are also first generation in the country. Their parents are immigrants, and it is another barrier to try to learn how to navigate that system as a parent who didn't grow up in the educational system here. I was born and raised in Ecuador, and I had access to the best education at home. And it was still difficult to navigate with my son the American educational system. So I can only imagine what it is to navigate when you have a different experience than mine. And so having these additional support programs are simply like MESA or Gear Up in schools are simply trying to bridge the talent that we have in our students with the resources that they need to fulfill their academic or career goals.
One of the other things to add on top of systemic racism is that, the personal biases of the instructors, of the teachers. So now you're adding another layer, another barrier that students have to face, whether it's intentional or not. They're there and they exist.
Yeah, on Maria's point, there are some really scary studies out there of like professors taking longer to answer emails from students who have non-Caucasian sounding names, right? The emails should probably be answered in the order in which they were received. That's generally a good process. I would assume in most of those cases that that's actually like not intentional, but it's still happening, right? And also like the students of non-white students are more likely to be suspected of cheating when they do well. And these are data-backed studies, right? Not people's opinions. And when you start to see stuff like that and it gets at implicit bias, which Maria's talking about, and sometimes it's not, right? It's on purpose or whatever, it's actually intentional. That stuff is very problematic, but the stuff we talk about a lot is like all the stuff that's happening that people aren't aware of and aren't doing on purpose, but it's implicit in their system. That's the really, really scary stuff, right? Because there's no beneficiary. People don't think it's a problem. And if you're not a white person, oftentimes you get that lived experience denied, right? The other point to what Paul was saying, we are starting to recognize this thing that we do too when we teach English and when we grade students writing. So we do it in science too. So I'm in science and I can say we're guilty of this too, but is that if it doesn't sound like what we think is good writing, we think it's not good writing, right? But what it's sounding like is a different language from a different culture or a different perspective or valuing of different things, right? Using more descriptive terms. And so students that are not bad writers think that they are bad writers because they have a different voice, right?
All right, I thought someone else was going to say something. before I move on to my next question, does anyone have anything else? Okay. Thank you. I didn't know some of that information. So this is really informative for me. What barriers to education do we see locally because of systemic racism? Like, we can talk about it generally, but can you tell us, like, here in Wenatchee and East Wenatchee, here in our education system, what are the main things that we see, the main, you know, yeah.
I can speak to my experience as a program director. In order to join MESA, we need our students to have preparation to take algebra at the college level. And a lot of our students that come from local high schools come in with remedial math. So we have to wait for a year or so until we can recruit those students into our program. And so creating a system that supports those students so that when they graduate with a high school diploma, they are ready to take math level courses will be a way to respond to that disparity. And when we look at the percentages of the students taking remedial classes, it's a large percentage that are Latinx students. And so it is meaningful to have a specific plans to address those disparities in math, so our students are ready to go when they graduate, and especially if they want to go into science or engineering, technology, math degree, they need to be ready with their math and sciences so that they don't spend a lot of time in remedial classes, because that's where they may lose interest and then switch careers. And so having them ready will be meaningful to have them then pursue careers that will give them a better future.
I have a couple observations, if I could.
Yes.
You know, I've been in the community, it's my 13th year. And when I first arrived, I noticed it was just general access that was an immediate challenge for our Spanish-speaking families. Out of all of our 9 Eastmont schools, I think I had one that had a Spanish-speaking person in the office. And so we immediately set that as a district goal that we measure every year. And we achieved that a few years ago, but that was an initial goal, just so that a parent or a grandparent or a student could come in and feel that there was someone that could help them understand where they need to go to speak to a high school counselor, someone in the math department. That was very critical. We also set some goals. We just noticed that we looked at disproportionality throughout our district, both in data as well as in personnel, and set goals to narrow our disproportional data gap so that all of our different ethnic groups were performing more similar than different. But we also set a goal to have more bilingual employees throughout the district, recognizing that whether it's math or science or English or arts, there are a language barrier exists wherever you go that you don't speak the prominent language in that community. And those have been some things that we have found very helpful. And then I would say the last thing that has helped us identify barriers, we contracted several years ago with WSU as a partner. And we've invited them in to come and look at all of our discipline practices, or excuse me, not our discipline, our grading practices, and examine those for any type of prejudicial or racial bias. And they pulled report cards and standards and gave all of our faculty a report, and then did a subsequent report. And we made a commitment to return them on an ongoing basis to hopefully identify improvement as well as areas that are still challenges. So thank you.
I think also another thing, you know, I appreciate the comments that Garn just made. One way we are failing our community is recognizing that our student population is made up almost 50% minorities, students of color, and 50% white. We're pretty close to those numbers. So recognizing who our student population and our families are. Wenatchee School District has done, you know, has taken the right steps in providing those services to our parents in Spanish, you know, using different formats to reach the diverse community that we have. So small steps, but I think we have a lot of work to do in recognizing who our student population is and who our community is, so we can better serve them. You know, one of, you know, in regards to that, 50% students of color, we need our staff and our teachers to represent our community. We have a lot of work to do in that regards. You know, Paul, Dr. Gordon and I have had those conversations, and there's so much research and study out there that shows how students perform better when they're being taught or they're around, you know, instructors, teachers, peers that look like them, that they can identify with. So, you know, by not being able to provide that to our students, to our community, we are doing a huge disservice. And unfortunately, that goes, you know, that goes way beyond. It comes from the higher ups, and but it's a thing that, you know, we need to first stop and realize the community that we're serving, the community that we're in.
I'd echo what Maria and Garn are saying, and you know, the word that we want to use more and more in the Wenatchee School District is being really intentional about what we're doing, intentional about our communication. We're getting better. We're not there. We meet regularly with a group of Latino community members who help us understand a better way of communicating, different ways of communicating, effective ways of communicating, and really trying to be intentional about the work that we're doing. I see in the people who've joined us, our participants, we've got a number of our students from our AVID program, but it's, as Karina has talked about with the MESA program, it's having more and more AVID-like programs, because I'm telling you, as I see Arlette and others from the AVID class, what it does to prepare our students and being really intentional about that, but widening that net. More and more students are participating in those programs, will give kids better opportunities to move the needle forward. I think the other piece that we talk about in my early tenure here is being really intentional about grouping of students. We really think about grouping of students at the middle and high school level, but quite honestly, it happens in kindergarten already. You know, those of my generation remember being in, you know, the Bluebird group or the Redbird group or Silverbird group or whatever group it was. But the research is really clear. Every time we put students in lower groups, for them to get out of that group, about 90% of those students never leave that group for the rest of their academic careers. So look at what we're doing when we say you are this student and you're going to be in this Silverbird group. Those have long-term consequences. And I know as educators, we do this not to be hurtful. We do it because, you know, we feel like we've got to fill up those gaps before students can move on. But too often they stay there and they never move out. So they never get grade level content. Grade level content is one of the most important aspects a student can receive, because when they go to Wenatchee Valley College, when they go to University of Washington, when they go to New York University, it's grade level content that they have to be at. They have to be reading and writing at grade level content. They have to be thinking at a grade level content area. So when we do that, oftentimes we think that's a secondary issue. No, that's honestly a kindergarten, first, second, third grade piece that we then continue to move forward. So it's a piece that we're thinking about and talking about within our organization. How do we do this better? But by no means do we have all the answers, but those are pieces that we're having adult conversations about what does this look like for us.
Maria mentioned about the employees, the staff, the teachers representing the community and looking like the community here. And so we've had several questions come in addressing this, specifically wondering if there is training for implicit bias or anti-racist training for employees and teachers, because we know that we're not there yet. So is this something we are doing or thinking about doing, or how can we help the, you know, Caucasian teachers recognize and see the racism in their classroom, and how do they address that?
Well, Karina can tell me if I'm wrong because she knows more than me, but I believe there is an executive order in place that we can no longer do implicit bias training or talk about many of the things that we're talking about here today. And so if that stands, we're probably looking at a place where each of us is going to have to take responsibility for ourselves in a real and meaningful way, right? Because if those trainings have been available and are, but if they can no longer be funded and institutions can no longer provide them, that means it's on each and every person to figure that out for themselves. And it is not an easy thing to do, right? It's uncomfortable and it's uncharted territory, and to do that unsupported could be particularly challenging, right? But yeah, these exist. We have them, lots of them are mandatory or have been previously. But it's also like the training is one thing, and the ability to apply that in what you do, and then the ability to change a system. There's a lot of levels that go beyond just the training.
And to what Maria was telling about, like, we need to hire people of color, like the people who look like them. Because most of the time, I think what happens is our students don't see themselves in higher places because they don't see colored people in those higher level positions. They don't see them represented in the higher level positions. So they think that, oh, we cannot do that. It's only for white people. So that's something that needs to be changed by their mentality. Like, no, you can. It's about showing them examples. Like, no, there are colored people in the higher level positions. You can be a doctor. You can be an engineer. You can be a professor. It's not only for white people. So that's something that we need to work on. Like,
Is that
starting from kindergarten? Like, oh, even preschool. Because my kid goes to preschool, and I see the whole 12, like he used to go to a preschool with 12 students or 12 kids, and the class has two groups, majority of white students and the Latinos, and then the colored students, two groups, and they are 4 years old. So
is there work through curriculum? Obviously, if it's starting at such a young age, is it something that curriculum wise we could change to show the success and how the country has been built by people not just white?
I think one important change in curriculum would be recognizing that we have a different population. First, we gotta recognize there is no official language in the US. And so the fact that there's only one bilingual school in the district is a disservice to the community that we have. Recognizing that that bilingual, biliterate education needs to start and can start as early as pre-kindergarten, right? It's one way to affirm the living experiences of our students. If they only hear Spanish at home, then they will tend to compartmentalize that language to just belonging there. Where you see bilingual education and a curriculum that serves the population that we have, you see that flow of language between English and Spanish, or whatever language it is for the community that you have. You see students flowing between those two languages with ease, and it's beneficial for their sense of belonging, because language is community and language is resistance. Language is a way to connect with your family. And when that language is not heard in the classroom, you're making that disconnect between my belonging in this classroom and what belongs at home. And so that is one way that we can provide access to students. As an instructor, I use Spanish in the classroom because I want my Spanish-speaking students to know that if you need to communicate with me in Spanish, there is that option for you to communicate with me. There is that beauty in diversity of language. And also we gotta recognize we are in the land of the Pesquosa people, and we don't hear their language here. So we have the option of having the region be multilingual. So it's not only the Spanish-speaking people, but also the people that were in this land before us. And what are we doing to honor their land, to honor what they did before we came here?
In regards to your question about diversity training and whatnot, you know, going back to Bobby's point, whether it's allowed or not, but in an ideal world, I think these are trainings that, or at least conversations that need to be had. Just because it's so important, because sometimes, you know, we talk about biases, and in these types of trainings, you step back and realize that, okay, you know, I wouldn't consider myself a racist person, but my, you know, my behavior, my actions, my thoughts are, you know, impacting in a negative way. Or so I think, you know, it's super hard to say, yeah, we, you know, yeah, let's do trainings when, you know, there's the limitations of it, but I think they're essential, especially this day and age, you know, where our country's at. I think people need to be aware, and people need to have uncomfortable conversations for us to get past that hurdle. Without those conversations, I don't think anything would change.
I have learned, especially having conversations like these, that we really are all racist, and it's just recognizing the racism in us that then helps us to move forward and have hard conversations like this one. We have had some questions about if there aren't, if the schools and school districts aren't able to offer the training and support to teachers, what else can we do to help them in this? And I was just wondering, through the social justice series on the museum's website, at least, we have a page that we add resources to. Someone keeps mentioning a book called Unpack Your Impact. And if we put a book list or resource list together on our website, would that be helpful to let the teachers know that it's there, and that if they aren't allowed to have formal training, that this is a resource that they could have? Is there any other ways the community could support teachers and educators and the system in trying to overcome these barriers?
I think engaging in conversations, I think this is a great start. Prior to the pandemic, what was it, Paul? You might have to help me out here. The conversations we had in regards to at the museum, there was a couple of them, and then we branched out to cafe to have the same conversations about
race and the impact it has on education.
Okay.
And Maria's right. I mean, it is about, we've got to sit down and have conversations with each other. We have to talk, and quite honestly, for us, we need to listen. And as a white male, a little over 50, not much, I have a lot to learn, and I recognize I bring a lot of privileges to the table. So what Maria was talking about it was an opportunity to listen and really create opportunities for people to talk to the tables. And then when we were at cafe, we had a number of people show up that evening and really express different thoughts. And then we've worked with students, and out of the mouth of babes, I'm telling you, they are honest, they're forthright about experiences that they've had in education. And that's when it really becomes, it's in your face about the experiences of students through our district and other districts who've experienced racism, and having those hard conversations. We haven't solved anything, but I do believe that first step is exactly where Maria was talking about, is opening the door to sit and listen and engage, and having partners like the museum who host events like this and ask tough questions, and have our participants ask really hard questions.
Do you want me to go? Okay.
Yeah.
The only way to deal with racism is to consistently identify it, right? Call it out, talk about it, describe it. That's how you dismantle it, right? If you're trying to take a wall down in your house and you pretend like the wall doesn't exist, it's going to stay there, right? You have to like figure out how the wall works and what is it holding up, and then you can dismantle it. And if we don't do that, right, if we ignore it or we don't talk to each other, I think the other thing that we consistently see, that I'm sure I have done in my life and probably still do, is not believe people when they tell us, right? We need to believe people when they tell us what they're experiencing, and not say, and not look in our own viewpoint, like, well, I've never experienced that, so it can't be true, or because it's painful to think that you're hurting someone else, or you're oppressing them, or you've benefited from a system, which is something we see, especially maybe other places, I just don't know, but in higher ed, where people have worked really hard for a really long time to get to where they are. And then often they feel very threatened by the thought of like white privilege, because they maybe feel like it discounts their work or their journey, right? And it can be really hard to recognize that, yeah, you worked hard and it was hard for you. So now imagine if there was also all these other barriers, right? And so I think one of the key things that we need to do first is just start believing each other, right? We need to believe people's lived experience. And when they say, this doesn't feel fair, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel safe, right? We need to believe that. Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to make any progress.
Thank you. We've been talking about having these conversations as adults, but we're getting some questions in about bringing students into the conversation about racism, about talking to kids about it, and what's the parent's role. We talked about, there was a question about systemic racism as far as like some people get tutors and other people don't have that privilege. So what's the role of the parent then in making sure that that the resources are available, or the conversations are happening in a home? Should they happen at home? Should racism be talked about with kids at home? When should it start? Or should we just talk about it as adults? So where does this all go?
I have conversations about racism with my children. You have excellent books that are for children that talk about this issue. Teaching Tolerance has a good list of books for kids that help you to talk about racism. The last one we read was about Sylvia Mendez. Her and her family set the stage for Brown versus Board of Education, where her family was assigned to the Mexican school, which was the one with the lowest quality, and her dad just would not take a no for an answer, and they set up the stage for what would later be what we see now in our schools. And so they have children books about how some people are treated differently, and for me it has become that, at least for that conversation with children, with my children, has been very personal. because my kid is a brown kid growing up in this town, and so I have to ensure that he knows his value, that he is a beloved creature of God, and that he has the talents that he has, that he and that he will face barriers, but that we can have these conversations with honesty, and they have the best questions. So really, don't be scared about talking about those topics with your kids, because they see things differently. And so there are good resources for teaching or talking to your kids about racism, and then just let them ask you questions. And they are really, really good at seeing these things with different lenses than we adults. Sometimes we shy away from these difficult conversations that are not really that hard for children.
A Want These t-shirt says it all, right? Dr. Iñiguez, right? You at home, whether you like it or not, right? You're either teaching racism or you're teaching equality. There's no middle. And so we need to think about that with our children, right? And also, it's not on like an oppressed people to be responsible to overcome their own oppression. So Karina talks about it with her children, and I need to talk about it with my child, right? Because I do not want my child to be the white person oppressing Karina's children, right? It's not all on these other groups of people, right? It's our responsibility. And also, like, we are not separate people. There is no them and us. There's only us. And that's really important. And if we teach our children that, right, we don't need implicit bias training when they're 30, because they won't be subject to what we're subject to or whatever, if we start when they're younger.
And I think another important thing is we need to teach our kids to say something if they see something. Like it's about, oh, that's okay, that's fine, that's how they were always treated. No, it's about saying something. Like kids are really good at identifying these things. Like at the younger age, they would know that, oh, that's not good, what's going on there. So it's about letting them know that. Like there's this awesome book that we are reading at our home called Say Something. So it talks about in different scenarios how you should speak up for yourself and for your friends or anyone in that content, not just your friends, anyone who's out there in school, especially, right? Because I feel like that's where it all started at that younger age. And they should know how to speak to themselves and for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So much to learn. We can learn so much from our young children. In our home, it started at a very young age. I would say probably 4, where our son started to notice the difference between himself and his peers. And that was at a preschool. So we made the very intentional decision to have him enrolled in a school that has a diverse student population. That was very important to us. And so, you don't think that as a 4-year-old, they are able to tell the difference and even make comments such as, I want to be like so-and-so because their skin is white. So I think, again, books are awesome, especially at that age. But also, being open, having open conversations. I can't remember, we were watching a cartoon a couple weeks ago, and a character has 2 dads. And so I was like, oh, so-and-so has 2 dads. He's like, oh yeah. And so just, this is the world that we live in. And it was like, he was so accepting of it, didn't ask questions, so just being open and, introducing that at a young age as these things start coming up. So it's normalized. And it's not like, Bobby mentioned, well, no, 30-year-olds need implicit bias training. We can definitely go there way before that.
Yeah.
I know, Garn, you had something to add. Can you share with us your thoughts? Are you there? Well,
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thanks.
You know, we're all here today to try to improve in our school districts and I think our community. And none of us choose our parents. I had a fundamentalist, far right mother and a hippie father in 2 different states, and I bounced back and forth. But I do get to choose in my current role how I approach this. We all have different roles. And when I work with SUPs and school districts, I really like them to think about, you know, what you promote, what you protect, and what you inspect becomes your culture. And racism can be subtle. It can be we avoid those people, or we shout at those people. It can be loud. But every social scientist will also tell you it's measurable. And as a policy person, I would encourage our valley to look at policies, simple things that as a school board or as a public agency, we're going to look at the number of bilingual people. We're going to look at where our Latino students are going. How are they, what's happening to them with their graduation rates and beyond. We're going to look at disproportionality in our discipline. And I remember when I used to observe teachers, I would do a gender count over 10 minutes in a conversation. And teachers want to be unbiased. And I could easily do a 10-minute count. And I'd say, are you aware you asked one student 6 questions, but there were 10 questions that never got asked of anyone? So let's do those simple things. Let's, as policy people, all of us are in these roles. Let's start looking at what we inspect. And that's, I guess, what I would hope we would do as an outcome of this meeting, is start to push in those directions, because that becomes our culture.
To that, are there any initiatives in your schools now that you're new initiatives that you're starting? I know with this year, especially COVID-19 has created, I think, even more disparity in education. We're all dealing with educating at home, me too. So it's a challenge and we're all doing our best, but do we have any new initiatives to address these inequities as we move forward? Is there anything new you'd like to share, or anything that you'd like the community to, you know, call our senators or representatives and advocate for?
I would just say first, thank you for this opportunity. But, you know, yes, I've had a chance to work on some of this for a while. And when we've listened to our parents and our students, they do share biases and they do share discriminatory practices. We've done training for years, both as that we offer our teachers and we do in our all group. We've done extensive training on working and supporting at-risk students of all types, regardless of ethnicity. They tend to have a lot of the same traits, but we've also worked really hard on the other end to look at what our high school programs look like and are there barriers. Once again, our board will annually look at our grad rates, what's our disproportionality. And then it's enlightening and a little bit terrifying when you bring in a team of WSU professors and they come in looking to write the next paper and they pull your whole district apart. But it's always been kindly presented in that here are some areas you need to look at. You don't have alignment with your curriculum here. These are barriers for kids that don't have time for homework. And you have to open yourself up to those kind of conversations, but also keep it in front of you. It's easy to say, oh, we did that last year. Now we're going on to something else. And if it's truly, it's kind of like physical health. You have to work at it all the time or you quickly lose it. So thank you.
I think, you know, as school districts just around the country are going to have their work cut out, you know, with the whole COVID remote learning, we already had big, you know, gaps between our, you know, our students of color and their peers. So with this whole remote learning, you know, we've had a good experience. However, I know that's not the experience that the majority of parents are having. And once students return back to a normal environment, you know, our work's going to be cut out. You know, how are we going to address the even wider gaps? And really focusing on those populations that, you know, we're already behind, and that gap has just become even more so there. And so, you know, I don't really know, but I think, you know, if there was a small focus on it, now we have to really take a deep look into those student populations.
For us, actually, at the Wenatchee School District, we're really leaning into the science of reading, really leaning into professional development of our educators. What I say all the time is, until our big people grow, our little people won't. So we've got to spend the time and energy and the focus and the intentionality of helping our educators and our staff achieve the outcomes we're hoping for our students. So for us, it's really starting with really rethinking how we teach reading at the most basic level, and understanding that most universities around the country are not teaching the science of reading. So we're in a school districts around the country are in this bad place of getting teachers into a system that have not had the science of reading part of their own curriculum. So you're now expecting school districts to then try to teach them a totally different way of educating students that has been proven time and time again to be more beneficial, because we're at the letter level, we're at the syllable level, we're at the morpheme level, we're at really decoding and not using old practices of looking at pictures to decode words, skipping and skimming. So we're taking this head on, because we know if our students can become readers, they can become almost anything. Mathematicians, scientists, entrepreneurs, they can do anything they want if they have that basic foundation of reading. Because we think about all of the other jobs and skills out there. Foundationally, it's all about reading. There's not a mathematician, there's not a scientist who can say, you know what, I really don't know how to read very well, but I am a rock star scientist. That doesn't exist, because all of these skills kind of they just morph into each other. But at the foundation of it is reading. So we're putting a lot of time and energy there, and really supporting our educators. And it's not, this is not our teachers' fault. This is a systems issue that is really impacting Black, Latino, Indigenous, and students of poverty at a much greater rate than anything else. So I believe, I'm with Garn, there are some true actionable steps that we can do. And one of them starts every day. We are teaching our students how to read and write.
And here at WBC, tomorrow we have our third listening session organized by the Diversity, Equity, and Campus Life Department, where staff, faculty, and students get a chance to talk and check on each other. We created this series with the coming of the pandemic. We needed that space where we can check on each other and see where we're at, where the gaps are, what can we do better. And so we created that space at the institutional level to figure out how we're going to support each other, because remote learning is difficult for everybody. And so how can we extend each other grace and do this together? And also, it's important to recognize that COVID will probably, this year, because of COVID, will probably not be an academic year. It'll be a year about support and relationship. It'll be a year about building that sense of belonging for students that have not had that sense of belonging in the past. And so we gotta recognize that as educators, and it's really difficult, right? Because we want to make sure that they achieve at the highest potential. And I think it is evident that there are some barriers that are much greater for some students than others. So making sure that we're building relationship and we are supporting our students where they are is going to be more important than the academics, at least for this year. So that is going to be the focus of our program. We continue to support academically our students, but we just want to make sure that they are doing okay. If we are struggling, our students are struggling as well.
Gosh, you guys, we have so many more questions about discipline and the inequities that goes on in there that we know is systemic across the country. We have questions about whether we have ability, or maybe we already have it, Black, Indigenous, people of color committee of students who can speak to and advise the districts on what they're, you know, seeing and witnessing in the classroom. We do not have time to cover all of these amazing questions, and I really am sad about that, but luckily this is a series, so we may get this group back together for another conversation to continue this. Anyways, yes, more questions are still coming in. So I'm going to stop us there because it is almost the end of our hour, but I just wanted you to know that we are still getting questions in, and because this is a series, and we do have our page on our website at the museum. If any of you have resources that you want to share with the community, please email me after later today, and we will get links to anything that you share up on our website so that the community can come back and use those. Teachers can use them if they want to do their own work on this topic, and I hope that you'll join me again as we continue the conversation. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And if you have a topic that you would like us to add to our series on social justice, please send us your suggestions through the comments or chats, or you can email us at info@wvmcc.org. Next week on Friday, October 16th, the museum is opening a new exhibit. Now, I know you think that it's crazy that we're opening an exhibit when we're not open to the public, but we have an exhibit installed, which we will share virtually until hopefully soon we can invite small groups of people into the museum to see it in person. And this exhibit is called Raising Our Voice, Empowering Women. And it's in celebration of women's suffrage. And in conjunction with this exhibit, we're hosting a local women in politics question and answer session to hear from our local leaders about their paths to office and how and why more women could get involved in running for office. So that community forum will be held on Wednesday, October 21st at 12 p.m. And you can find out more about that on our website, WenatcheeValleyMuseum.org. Thank you again to all our panelists and audience for your participation today. And we hope you'll be able to join us again as we continue this conversation. I really appreciate your time. And like I said, it's not over. We will have more conversations on this topic because it's big and we can't answer all the questions today, but I'm glad that you gave your time to talk with me and share with the community this important discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.